All right, first things first, what in the world is the MCAT? For those of you that don't know, the MCAT stands for Medical College Admission Test. Although recently revised in 2015, it is not a new exam. Since 1928, it has taken the form of many tests with many names, many looks, and even many variations in length. But the one thing that has stood the ultimate test of time, if you want to go to medical school, you need to sit for this exam. Almost every single medical school in the United States requires the MCAT. And if you're thinking, oh, I'll just go to Canada, they're great. Wrong. Most Canadian schools require this bad boy too. And more than 85,000 students each year take the exam. And if you watched my earlier video, you know that medical school admissions committees take the score very, very seriously. So, if you're serious about slaying the beast, then you have to do your research. You have to know your enemy and you have to know him well. And before I took the MCAT, I made sure I knew as much as I can before I walked in. And when I sat down to take the test, I felt like I had been there so many times before. All right, I'm back. I have no idea what that was, but I had a glass of water and I think I'm good to go. Like I was saying, before I took the MCAT, I made sure I knew as much as I could before I walked into the room, because when I sat down to take the test, I felt like I had been there so many times before, which makes the process a lot less stressful. I'm going to explain everything there is to know about this test so that you have a pretty good idea of what you're signing up for. And it'll make the preparing for it so much easier because, although you can retake the test, you really don't want to. Believe me, you want to be done with this test as quickly as you can. You'll want to score as high as you possibly could the first time around. And it'll save you, a lot of time, a lot of money, and a huge amount of stress. So this is what you need to know about the MCAT. All right, number one, I just want to discuss a general overview of the exam. This is literally written in every review book for the MCAT, as well as pretty much any website that even remotely discusses the MCAT. So I'm pulling this information directly from one of my old review books, which I'll link in the description box below just so you know where I got it. But number one, how do you register for the test? You go to www.aamc.org. Which stands for Association of American Medical Colleges. They're the people that create and administer the MCAT, as well as run the application services for the allopathic, the MD schools across the country. They're known as AMCAS as well. The MCAT testing centers occur in tightly regulated Pearson centers across the country, and this test is offered several times over the course of 1 year. You can take it in January, April, May, June, July, August, and September. And then following September, you'd have to wait a few months till January of the following year. The length of the test, it's about 7.5 hours, longest entrance exam for any graduate program known in the U.S. It's longer than the LSAT, longer than the GMAT, and longer than the GRE by at least 3 hours. So it is not a sprint. It is definitely a marathon, so you have to prepare for it as such. There are 4 sections. The Chem and Phys section, known as the Chemical and Physical Foundations. The CARS section, which stands for Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills. The Bio section, that people refer to, it's officially known as the Biological and Biochemical Foundations. And then finally, Psych-Soc, which is just the psychological and social foundations for behavior. You get noise-canceling headphones and or foam earplugs, which are typically offered in the testing center itself. No personal timers or watches are allowed in the exam room. Scratch paper or a whiteboard or both will be offered to you to make notes on during the exam. There will be a specialized locker area for food and belongings for when you walk into the exam and before you go into the testing room. Usually you get your MCAT scores about 3 to 4 weeks following the date. Just plan for a month. That's what it usually comes out to be. The MCAT, like I said, can be taken multiple times in 1 year, but a maximum of 3 times in a single year. 4 times max over 2 years, and then 7 times maximum during your whole life. So after 7 times, if you're not happy with your score, you just got to live with it because you can't take it an 8th time. And also, you can only be registered for 1 exam at a time. Only reason that this is a rule is because some people in the past have tried to, they said, I'll take this the April exam, and if I'm not happy with that score, I'd want to retake it. So let me just register for the April exam and the June exam at the same time. And that's not allowed. So just plan for 1 exam. All right, so that was sort of the general overview of the exam. I want to spend a little bit more time in discussing the individual sections. I mentioned there were 4. There are 3 science sections, the first being Chem Phys. Cars is not really considered science, and so that's excluded. In the Chem Phys section, which is the first section that you'll see upon entering the exam room, there's 59 total questions. 44 of those questions are passage-based, meaning you'll see the questions in groups of 4 to 6 per passage, and the answers to these questions depend on information in the passage that you just read, as well as some external background information that the exam is assuming you've studied and learned that may help tie in the answers to the questions. The remaining 15 of the 59 questions are freestanding, which means they don't depend on any information that you read. They can just be questions pulled from any topics within the realm of known subjects covered on the MCAT. Also, the freestanding questions are not just all at the end of the section. They're sort of, spread out throughout the section in between the passages. Usually, if I remember correctly, it was about like 2 passages of your passage-based questions, and then following those 2 passages, there's maybe a subset of 4 to 5 freestanding questions, and they keep doing this until you've answered 59 questions total. Also, you should know both freestanding and passage-based questions are multiple choice. All questions on the MCAT are multiple choice. You have exactly 1 hour and 35 minutes to complete the Chem Phys section, and the exact contents of the section vary each year. They usually average out to cover like 30% Gen Chem, 25% physics, at least general physics, 15% organic chemistry, 25% first semester biochemistry, as well as 5% of just general biology. You get electronic access to a periodic table throughout the test, but no calculator whatsoever. But we still haven't answered the question, what does the Chem Phys section actually test? And there's 2 parts to this answer. First of all 3 science sections, the Chem Phys, the bio, as well as the Psych Soc, test a few concepts on a broad scale. The 3 broad skills that the MCAT science sections test, and this is straight from AMC, the creators of the MCAT, and I'll put a link in the description for you. The 3 skills that they test are, number 1, knowledge of scientific concepts, meaning do you remember the science content you've accumulated during your undergraduate career, the knowledge that you've learned? 2, scientific reasoning and problem solving. Can you utilize your knowledge of multiple fields of science at the same time and apply them to sort of novel situations that the exam may present to you? Finally, number 3, reasoning about design as well as research and statistical data. Can you take a look at graphs and charts and other experimental results presented to you for the first time ever and then explain what you see? Can you extrapolate important information from these graphs and charts in a reasonable amount of time without ever having seen the data prior to that moment? And these 3 broad skills, they make for a great physician, and medical school admissions committees know this. And more importantly, these admissions committees want to know if you possess these skills. And they look at your MCAT score to do this. They know that these reasoning skills are required in order to succeed, not only through medical school, but also through residency and even beyond that. And they don't want to waste an investment by offering you a seat for admission if you're not going to be able to handle the rigor of the medical school curriculum. And if you've ever heard someone say that the MCAT is mostly, content-based or knowledge-based, then they've clearly never attempted to take the exam. Even according to AMC, the creators of the MCAT, 2/3 of what the science sections test are reasoning-based skills and not knowledge-based. So I said there were 2 parts to answer the question, what does the Chem Phys section test? Well, the first part is the same for all 3 science sections. That's the 3 broad skills that I've just explained. However, specific to the Chem Phys section, some topics that will come up, include the following. For Gen Chem, they could test atomic structure, periodic table, thermochemistry, acids, bases, electrochemistry, as well as kinetics and equilibrium. And for physics, I said gen physics, but that covers a lot. That covers units, dimensional analysis, kinematics, that's huge on the test, work, energy, thermodynamics, lights, optics, waves and sounds as well usually come up every once in a while. Organic chemistry is also on the chem phys section. They can cover nomenclature, isomers, spectroscopy, lab techniques, which seems to be the most prevalent topics. But expect to see some questions about reactions between alcohols, ethers, ketones, aldehydes. And again, this is straight from AAMC, from Kaplan, from the Princeton Review. They all highlight this in their review book. Section number 2, after a 10-minute break, the CARS section, known as a critical analysis and reasoning skills. You have exactly 90 minutes, an hour and a half, to read several passages and answer 53 multiple choice passage-based questions. Unlike the Chem Phys sections, as well as the other 2 science sections, the CARS is multiple choice still, but does not have any sort of freestanding questions. They're all passage-based. And each passage is followed by 5 to 7 questions instead of 4 to 6. And CARS, in a nutshell, it tests your ability to read a passage, understand the information that you're reading, and then answer questions related to that information. It sounds easy, but when you add a few more pieces of information, it might change your mind. First of all, CARS, the passages that you read, may not be something that you find interesting. And we all know that reading something you don't find interesting just isn't interesting. Topics may range from literature, the arts, philosophy, religion, economics, history, as well as even political science, which I enjoyed some of these topics, but definitely not all of them, and it makes it a little harder to keep focused. It's okay to lose interest, just don't lose focus. Acing your MCAT starts with, not falling asleep during the exam. Second of all, CARS' style of writing may not be suited to your taste. For example, the writing could be really abstract and really hard to grasp the first time around. This makes things a little more difficult because there may not be enough time for a second thorough run through the passage. And so you got to keep your eye on the clock. Always keep your eye on the clock. And at the same time, the writing could be the opposite. It could be concrete and straight to the point, which is awesome when you think about it. But the questions following this kind of passage are still going to be abstract and not really straight to the point. It's the kind of questions that will make you sort of wish that the passage was longer and had more information. More information to work with usually is helpful. All right, before I move on past the CARS, I want to talk quickly about the types of questions that you may expect on this second section of the MCAT. About a third of the questions are known as comprehension questions. These questions typically focus on something singular, something like an idea or a fact or a single event. And you could be asked to simply state what the main idea of the whole passage was, or maybe even just what the author's perspective on a specific topic is, given the information that you've just read. You could also be asked to just pick and choose what topics were discussed in the passage and which were not, which sounds easy when you first look at it, but you have to remember that the choices, like any sort of other English or reading-based test, the question choices are going to be very similar, the answer choices, that is. And so it's up to you and your level of comprehension and analysis that will help you pick the winning choice, the best answer. About another third of the questions on the CARS will be known as reasoning within the text questions. These kind of questions will usually ask you to critically analyze the passage in a way that may require an inference about a specific argument. Or maybe you'll be asked to just compare and contrast 2 opposing views about a single topic. And then when you're being asked to critically analyze something, they want you to sort of identify what makes that specific argument strong and what makes it weak by selecting specific evidence from the passage. Note how you're being asked to analyze information already presented to you. They're not asking you to come up with new information. They just want you to be able to use information from within the text to analyze something. And that's why it's known as reasoning from within the text. The third type of question that you may be asked to answer within the CARS section, which is the second section of the MCAT, is going to ask you to analyze information sort of not presented to you anywhere else in the passage. This is known as the reasoning beyond the text question. It's probably some of the most difficult questions to answer. The question will first present you with some sort of new piece of information. which makes it beyond the text. And then it expects you to take what you learned from this new piece of information, as well as what you've gathered from reading the passage, and then apply that newly found wisdom to this new scenario that they're introducing. For instance, maybe they'll give you some piece of information and then sort of ask you whether or not this would support or go against what you believe the author stands for. And more importantly, they're going to ask you why. And here's what they're doing. They're seeing if you've comprehended the reading, and then they're seeing if you have the skill to take new information and sort of apply it to what you've seen before, and come up with this new answer. And it's sort of a lot to take in, but there's a reason they're asking you this. There's a method to the madness. Medical schools want to know if you possess the skills necessary to critically analyze facts presented to you within a reasonable amount of time. As a medical student as well as a physician, instead of always taking things at sort of face value, you want to be able to critically analyze them on the spot. All right, once you're done playing with cars, next is what may be the most important part of the test day, lunch. 30 minutes to just snack and recharge and just sort of get your mind off of things. Forget that you're at a piercing testing center. Forget what you're there to do. A little side note, make sure that you do not officially end the car section until you know that the exam administrator sees that your hand is raised and ready to be escorted out of the room. Once you see him or her approaching you so that they can escort you out of the room, then you should click the end section. It will only help prevent lost time because as soon as you hit end section, the lunch break timer starts counting down. And every minute counts. In my own personal experience, I ended up having like 12, 13 minutes instead of 30 because I hit end section and they took a while till they came in and did my exit procedure, and then I can finally go eat. Fully recommend that you take the break. It will only help you. Don't skip the break. We're all done eating and chatting and ready to take on section 3, the bio section, otherwise known as the biological and biochemical foundations. Just remember, like the Chem Phys, this is also considered a science section, and therefore you're going to be tested on the 3 reasoning skills that I mentioned earlier. More specifically, the breakdown of content you should expect to see on test day for the bio section is about 65% general biology, 5% chemistry, 5% organic chemistry, and about 25% first semester biochemistry. Other classes like anatomy, physiology, microbiology, immunology, histology, these will be very useful but not really required, and so a lot of people don't usually take these classes prior to taking the MCAT. Topics that will be covered on the bio section, the cell, the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the female and male reproduction, development, digestion, DNA, RNA, as well as a big part of it is the endocrine system and hormones, hormonal regulation. Very, very big on the bio section. Same as Chem Phys, 59 questions, all multiple choice. 44 of those questions are passage-based, 15 are freestanding, and then you have exactly 1 hour and 35 minutes. There's a 10-minute break after you're done with the bio section, and then you move on to the final section, which is the psychology and sociology, known as the Psych-Soc. Psych-Soc is the same as bio and Chem Phys in that it's the 3rd official science section, 59 questions, 1 hour and 35 minutes, 44 passage-based, 15 freestanding questions, and these can cover topics like maybe 70% psychology and 30% sociology. Sometimes it's a little less, a little more, but the point is way more psychology than you'll see Soc. And there's also some slight overlap between the psych and bio sections. In fact, if you look in some of the MCAT review books, there will be chapters that are 100% identical across the Psych-Soc review book and the biology review book. A lot of neurobiology or neuropsychology, cognition, identity, personality, psychological disorders, that's a big part of the section. A lot of learning and memory, emotion. And then for the Soc, you'll see a lot of social behavior patterns and structure. And then when you're done with that section, you're pretty much done. You'll get a notification on the screen. It'll ask you whether or not you want to void the exam. And the void option means, the exam is not graded and you'll never get any results and no one will ever know that you even took that exam. Never use this option. I repeat, never use this option unless you totally left a bunch of questions and you failed the exam, which most people think they know that they failed the exam and then they end up getting much higher score than they anticipated. So just never use the option. If you made it that far, if you went through 7.5 hours of excruciating pain, you should just leave the test, let it get scored, and see how you've done. And then, reassess from there on your next steps and what you want to do to improve that score. And finally, you'll have some survey questions. They'll ask you blah, blah, blah. How do you think about the test, the procedure, anything out of the ordinary? If you felt like you were sort of shorted in any way, if the exam administrator did something wrong that may have affected your score, you go ahead and write it in. Otherwise, you're done. You slayed the MCAT and scene. So we've covered the 4 sections on the MCAT and what you can expect to see in terms of questions, the timing, and so on. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the scoring on the MCAT exam. We said there are 4 sections. Each section has its own sub-score, and this can range from 118 to 132. And to calculate your total score, all you have to do is add up all 4 of your individual section scores, and that'll give you your MCAT score. Let's say you achieved the lowest possible score on each section. That means 118 on each section times 4 equals 472. Therefore, the lowest possible score you can ever get on the MCAT is 472. Let's say you crushed all the sections and you achieved the perfect score on all 4 sections. That means 132 times 4 gives you 528. That's the highest possible MCAT score that you can ever achieve. And so the MCAT therefore ranges from 472 to a high of 528. Each of these scores are associated with a national percentile rank because, the exam, if you didn't know, is graded on a curve. And so the most recent published percentile ranks describe the score of 524 to 528 as the 100th percentile. At the same time, a score of 500 put you at 49th percentile, meaning your score fell at the bottom half of the national mean. The national average MCAT score for the medical school applicant in 2018 was around 504 for allopathic programs, MD, and around 502 for osteopathic programs, DO. The national average MCAT score for the medical school matriculant in 2018 was reported to be around 510 for allopathic programs and around 504 for osteopathic programs. You should also know that these numbers really don't mean anything at the end of the day. They simply serve as general guidelines, and they should not be by any means goals or objectives that you establish strictly in order to try and gain acceptance into medical school. You can have 2 students, for example, each with a 508 MCAT score applying to the same exact school, same program, and have only just one of the 2 students get in and the other not. Or both get in, or maybe even both rejected. And the reason is because there are so many other factors at play, including GPA, extracurriculars, letters of recommendation, interview skills, as well as demographics and how well the mission statement of the program coincides with the professional goals of the applicant or the student. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take the MCAT seriously, but don't let the score alone decide if, when, and where you apply. Check out my other videos on tips for getting into medical school. I discuss a lot of these factors that may influence your success at landing a seat into a U.S. program. And so far, we've discussed what the exam is, how it looks, what's covered, and how the scoring works. I'm going to be making pretty soon here a video on how to sort of prepare for it and what review resources you should use, as well as which ones you should avoid, and some general tips and strategies for doing well on the exam. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was useful. Check out the description box below for some links that I may have discussed or referenced. And don't forget to check out my website, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel. Turn on notifications so that you know when I put that next video up. See you guys.